168 people,
Guessed.
mostly women and children, perished in 10 minutes.
The circus has always been a place of wonder and spectacle where the impossible becomes possible under the shimmering lights of the big top. Since Philip Astley first created the modern circus in 1768, these traveling shows have captivated audiences worldwide with death-defying acts and exotic animals. But behind the sequins and smiles lies a darker reality. For every successful somersault and tamed tiger, there exist moments when the illusion of control shattered, when the tightrope between entertainment and disaster snapped. These aren't the stories circuses advertise on their colorful posters, but they are perhaps the most important moments when the pursuit of spectacle resulted in tragedy. Let's pull back the curtain on these sobering chapters in circus history. The afternoon of July 6, 1944 began like any other summer circus day in Hartford, Connecticut. Nearly 8,000 spectators, mostly women and children, had packed into the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Big Top, eager for a few hours of escape from the realities of a world at war. The canvas tent, waterproofed with a mixture of paraffin wax and gasoline, stood as a temporary cathedral of entertainment. The band was playing the opening march for the Flying Wallender's High Wire Act when someone first noticed the small flame licking up the sidewall near the main entrance. Within minutes, the entire tent became an inferno, the paraffin coating acting as accelerant. The band leader, sensing disaster, quickly switched to the Stars and Stripes Forever, the circus's traditional disaster signal, but for many, it was already too late. The screams, recalled survivor Mildred Cook. I still hear them sometimes at night, people trampling over each other, the canvas falling like burning rain. The blaze spread across the ceiling with terrifying speed, dropping flaming pieces of tent onto the fleeing crowd below. In just 10 minutes, the entire structure collapsed. The final death toll reached 167, with over 700 injured, making it one of the worst fire disasters in American history. Most victims were children. Little 6-year-old Robert Norris was identified only by the melted remnants of his Roy Rogers belt buckle. Among the most heartbreaking discoveries was Little Miss 1565, an unidentified young blonde girl whose body remained unclaimed for decades despite her photograph appearing in newspapers nationwide. The aftermath brought criminal charges against circus management for negligence. The investigation revealed no fire extinguishers, no fire safety officers, and exits blocked by animal chutes. Ringling Brothers paid millions in settlements and nearly went bankrupt. Mary the Elephant's public execution. Long before social media could document acts of animal cruelty, a shocking spectacle unfolded in the small town of Erwin, Tennessee. On September 13, 1916, a 5-ton Asian elephant named Mary became the center of one of the most disturbing episodes in circus history, a public execution that would seem inconceivable today. Mary had been the star attraction of Sparks' world-famous shows for nearly 2 decades. But everything changed when the circus hired a new handler named Red Eldridge. With no experience working with animals, Eldridge reportedly prodded Mary with a bull hook when she stopped to reach for a watermelon rind. Mary's response was swift and deadly. She wrapped her trunk around the man, lifted him high in the air, and threw him against a drink stand before crushing his head with her foot. The horrified crowd began shouting, "Kill the elephant!" Local blacksmiths attempted to shoot Mary, but the bullets merely bounced off her thick hide. News of the incident spread quickly through the region's small towns and calls for retribution grew. Circus owner Charlie Sparks, fearing financial ruin if audiences turned against his show, made the grim decision to publicly execute Mary as both punishment and spectacle. "I didn't want to kill Mary," Sparks later said, "but I had to make the decision to save my circus and the other elephants." In what has become an infamous chapter of American circus history, Erwin railroad workers fashioned a makeshift gallows using an industrial crane on the railway tracks. Nearly 3,000 people, including many children, gathered to watch. Mary was chained and hoisted into the air, but the first attempt failed when the chain snapped, sending her crashing to the ground and breaking her hip. On the second attempt, Mary was successfully hanged, her massive body swinging as spectators cheered. Photographs of the hanging elephant circulated widely, eventually becoming reluctant historical documents of early 20th century attitudes toward animal welfare. The brutal public execution represents an era when animals were viewed primarily as property and entertainment, with little consideration for their sentience or rights. Massati's lion attack. The crowds that filled Bolton's Moor Lane Free Trade Hall on January 3, 1872, expected to witness the thrilling spectacle of man's dominion over beast. What they saw instead was nature's violent reminder of who truly holds the power. Thomas McCarty, performing under the name Massati the Lion Tamir, had built his reputation on particularly dangerous performances. Unlike many animal trainers who relied on relationships built with animals from cubhood, Massati's act involved working with adult lions recently captured from the wild. His routine with 5 male lions was the headline attraction of Manders' Grand National Star Menagerie. That winter evening, as gas lamps illuminated the performance space, witnesses described Massati as unusually nervous. He had been drinking beforehand, a common but dangerous practice among performers seeking liquid courage. As he entered the cage, he carried his usual props, a sword, a whip, and a small wooden chair used to direct the lion's attention. The performance began smoothly enough, but when Massati turned his back momentarily to acknowledge the audience's applause, a lion named Tyrant seized the opportunity. With one powerful lunge, the beast clamped its jaws around Massati's shoulder and dragged him to the ground. There arose a scream of horror from the audience, reported the Bolton Chronicle. Ladies fainted, children shrieked, and many persons rushed from the building, unable to witness the terrible scene. What followed was described by witnesses as a frenzy of teeth and claws. 2 other lions joined the attack, tearing at Massati's flesh while attendants desperately tried to drive them back with hot irons and rifles. When they finally retrieved his body, Massati's right arm had been torn off, his skull crushed, and his body severely mauled. The attack lasted only minutes but transformed Victorian attitudes toward wild animal performances. Newspapers across Britain carried graphic accounts of the tragedy, and public debate ensued about the ethics and safety of such spectacles. Though wild animal acts would continue for decades, Massati's death prompted the first serious discussions about protective barriers, safety protocols, and whether such dangerous performances should be permitted at all. The Hagenbeck-Wallace Circus train crash. In the early morning darkness of June 22, 1918, as America focused on distant wartime battles in Europe, one of the worst train wrecks in U.S. history unfolded near Hammond, Indiana, a disaster that would decimate the ranks of one of America's premier traveling shows. The Hagenbeck-Wallace Circus train had stopped on the tracks to cool an overheated axle. Red warning flares were placed along the tracks as circus performers and workers slept in the wooden passenger cars. At approximately 4 a.m., an empty troop train operated by Michigan Central Railroad came barreling down the same tracks at high speed. Its engineer, Alonzo Sargent, had fallen asleep at the controls, having taken medication that caused drowsiness. Sargent missed the warning signals completely. The troop train, traveling at about 35 miles per hour, plowed into the rear of the stationary circus train. The impact was catastrophic. Wooden circus cars splintered like matchsticks, and kerosene lamps ignited the wreckage. What followed was a scene of unimaginable horror. I was awakened by a terrific crash, recalled trapeze artist Jenny Ward. Our car turned completely over. I was thrown through a window, which likely saved my life. Behind me, everything went up in flames. The sleeping circus performers had no chance to escape. Many were crushed instantly in the collision. Others found themselves trapped in the burning wreckage. Those who witnessed the aftermath described the haunting sounds of screams coming from the inferno as rescuers struggled to reach victims. The final toll was devastating. 86 circus performers and workers killed, another 127 injured. Many victims were burned beyond recognition. 5 days later, a mass funeral was held in nearby Showman's Rest Cemetery, where many unidentified performers were buried in a shared grave marked simply unknown. The disaster nearly destroyed the Hagenbeck-Wallace Circus, then the second largest in America behind Ringling Brothers. Remarkably, the show continued, with competitors like Ringling Brothers lending performers and equipment. Just 2 days after the crash, the diminished circus performed in Beloit, Wisconsin, honoring the old tradition that the show must go on. The Flying Walenda's human pyramid collapse.
2 years after a high-wire stunt featuring the famed Walenda family that went horribly wrong.
For 3 generations, the Walenda family had defied gravity on the high wire, performing without nets at dizzying heights. Their signature act, the 7-person human pyramid, represented the pinnacle of circus artistry, combining extraordinary balance, strength, and absolute trust. On January 30th, 1962, in Detroit's State Fair Coliseum, that trust was shattered in an instant. The performance began like hundreds before it. The family ascended to the wire suspended 36 feet above the concrete floor, no safety net below them, as was their tradition. Carl Walenda, the 57-year-old patriarch, anchored the formation on one end. His brother Herman and son-in-law Richard Faunen held the balance bar at the front. Carl's son Mario and nephew Gunther walked behind them. At the pyramid's peak, Carl's daughter Jana and her husband Dieter Schepp balanced on chairs. The audience watched in hushed anticipation as the 7 performers inched across the wire. They had nearly reached the halfway point when disaster struck. Frontman Richard suddenly called out, "I can't hold anymore." The bar dipped and the carefully balanced formation began to collapse. Time seemed to slow down, recalled a horrified spectator. They tried so desperately to grab onto each other as they fell. The screams from both performers and audience, I'll never forget that sound. Mario Walenda managed to grab the wire, saving himself from the full impact. The others were not as fortunate. Dieter Schepp died instantly when his head struck the ground. Richard Faunen was killed on impact as well. Carl's brother Herman survived the fall but died from his injuries the next day. Jana suffered serious injuries and Gunther was permanently paralyzed from the waist down. Carl Walenda, who had fallen atop the others, walked away with only a bruised hip, though the emotional scars would run much deeper.
I've shed a lot of tears, if I'm being completely vulnerable, having to relive that accident yet again.
The patriarch helped identify the bodies of his family members before performing again just 6 weeks later, driven by the family's motto that the show must go on. The exact cause of the collapse remains debated. Some blame metal fatigue in the balance bar, others suggest a misstep or momentary lapse in concentration. Whatever the cause, the tragedy fundamentally changed high-wire acts across the circus world. Many troupes began using safety nets or harnesses, though the surviving Walendas notably continued to perform without them. Decius Spana's aerial silkfall modern circus performances had evolved far beyond the traditional animal acts and clowns of yesteryear. By the early 2000s, aerial performances using silks, straps, and hoops had become the breathtaking highlights of contemporary circus shows. These graceful displays combined dance, gymnastics, and theatricality, but still carried the inherent risks of working at height. On May 22, 2004, during a Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey performance in St. Paul, Minnesota, those risks became tragically apparent. Decius Spana, a 32-year-old Bulgarian-born aerialist, had been performing her signature aerial ballet for 7 years. Her act involved spinning and twirling while suspended by a chiffon-like fabric that hung from the arena ceiling. That Saturday night, before a crowd of nearly 9,000 spectators, Spana climbed 30 feet into the air and began her routine. She was like a butterfly up there, recalled audience member Sarah Thompson, so graceful and seemingly weightless, spinning in these beautiful circles. About 5 minutes into her performance, Spana transitioned to a move called the plunge, where she would wrap the fabric around her waist and descend in a spiral. Something went catastrophically wrong. The fabric suddenly unwrapped, and Spana plummeted headfirst to the concrete floor below. The impact was audible throughout the arena. "There was this terrible silence," said witness Mark Arneson. Then people started screaming and covering their children's eyes. The ringmaster came on and kept saying, "Please remain calm," but you could hear the panic in his voice. Medical personnel rushed to Spana, who was unconscious but still breathing.
I was worried because they fell and one guy ran off stage with a bloody head. I'm thinking something hit him in the head.
She was quickly transported to Regents Hospital, where she died about an hour later from severe head and spinal injuries. Her husband, fellow performer Ivan Espana, had been watching from backstage. The investigation revealed that Espana had properly secured her equipment and followed all safety protocols. The tragedy appeared to be the result of a split-second error in how she wrapped the fabric, a momentary lapse with fatal consequences after thousands of successful performances. Ringling Brothers cancelled the remainder of that day's shows but resumed performances the following day, omitting aerial acts as a sign of respect. The company implemented additional safety reviews for all aerial performances and eventually introduced modified harness systems for some aerial silk routines. Roy Horn's Tiger Mauling Las Vegas, October 3, 2003. The Mirage Hotel's 500-seat theater was packed as it had been nearly every night for the past 13 years. Siegfried and Roy's illusion-filled extravaganza featuring white tigers and lions had become one of the Strip's most successful shows, grossing over $45 million annually. That Friday night, during Roy Horn's 59th birthday performance, the carefully choreographed relationship between man and beast would dissolve in seconds. Montecore, a 400-pound white tiger, had been part of the act for 7 years. Normally, Roy would lead the massive cat across the stage, creating the illusion of a harmonious partnership between human and predator. But something was different this night. Midway through the performance, Montecore appeared distracted, deviating from the routine. When Roy noticed the tiger's unusual behavior, he tried to redirect the animal by tapping it on the nose with his microphone, a technique he'd used countless times before. This time, Montecore responded by clamping his jaws around Roy's arm. "No," Horn reportedly said calmly, conscious of not alarming the audience or further agitating the tiger. Release." Instead of releasing, Montecore dragged Horn off stage like prey. Stagehands sprayed the tiger with fire extinguishers, causing him to release his grip momentarily. But then Montecore seized Horn by the neck, severing his carotid artery and causing massive blood loss. As the audience watched in horror, what many had previously perceived as absolute control over these magnificent animals was revealed to be an illusion more fragile than any staged in the show. People were crying and screaming, recalled audience member Andy Cushman. Children were hysterical. It happened so fast, but it seemed to unfold in slow motion. Horn survived but suffered a stroke from the blood loss and was left partially paralyzed. The show, which had grossed over $1 billion during its run, closed permanently. Nearly 300 cast and crew members lost their jobs overnight. Controversially, Horn never blamed Montecore for the attack. He insisted until his death in 2020 that the tiger was actually trying to help him.
It was an accident. It was not like the paper would say. It was an attack. Because if a tiger attacks you, it takes 2 seconds to take you over.
Claiming he had suffered a mini-stroke on stage and Montecore was dragging him to safety. Animal behavior experts remained skeptical of this interpretation. The incident reignited debates about the ethics of using wild animals in entertainment. Animal rights activists pointed to the attack as evidence that even animals raised in captivity retain their predatory instincts and cannot be truly tamed. The Mirage incident directly contributed to Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey's later decision to phase out elephant acts and eventually influenced Circus to end all animal performances. The Moscow Circus Lion Rampage. The Soviet state circus carried immense cultural significance behind the Iron Curtain, projecting an image of Russian precision and control to domestic and international audiences alike. On May 27, 1980, that carefully crafted image shattered during a performance in Moscow when an act featuring 7 lions devolved into chaos and bloodshed. Nikolai Berjoskin was an experienced cat trainer who had worked with the Moscow Circus for over 15 years. His act featuring 7 male lions was considered the highlight of the program, demonstrating Soviet mastery over nature itself. On this particular evening, before a capacity crowd of 3,000 spectators, the usual routine took a deadly turn. The trouble began when one lion named Boris refused to perform a jumping trick. When Berjoskin used his training stick to encourage the animal, Boris lunged forward with unexpected ferocity, knocking the trainer to the ground. Within seconds, 3 other lions joined the attack. It was like a switch flipped, described circus worker Mikhail Tupolev, who witnessed the attack. One moment they were trained performers, the next they were wild predators in a feeding frenzy. The audience initially believed the attack was part of the act until Berjoskin's screams made the horrifying reality clear. Children began crying as parents covered their eyes. Several spectators fainted. Assistant trainers rushed into the cage with fire extinguishers and high-pressure hoses, attempting to separate the lions from the critically injured Berjoskin. When these efforts failed, security personnel fired warning shots into the air. In the ensuing confusion, 3 lions escaped the cage and entered the audience area. There was complete pandemonium, recalled audience member Svetlana Petrova. People were climbing over each other to reach the exits. A woman next to me was trampled unconscious in the rush. The lions themselves, likely disoriented by the noise and commotion, didn't attack audience members but caused several injuries in the panic. Eventually, handlers managed to recapture the animals, but not before Berjoskin had suffered catastrophic injuries. He died en route to the hospital. Soviet authorities initially attempted to suppress news of the incident, but word spread throughout Moscow. The official investigation blamed Berjoskin for deviating from established training protocols, a conclusion many of his colleagues disputed. More significantly, the rampage permanently changed the Moscow Circus's approach to big cat acts. Steel mesh barriers were installed between the audience and the performance ring. The number of lions used in any single act was reduced, and additional emergency exits were added to all circus venues. Cirque du Soleil's fatal falls. When Cirque du Soleil emerged in the 1980s, it represented a revolutionary reimagining of circus arts, one that eliminated animals entirely and elevated human performance to unprecedented artistic heights. The Canadian company's ethereal productions, with their dreamlike aesthetics and seemingly impossible acrobatics, transformed circus from lowbrow entertainment into theatrical art. But even this modern, sophisticated approach to circus couldn't eliminate the fundamental dangers of aerial performance, as became tragically clear with a series of fatal accidents. On June 29, 2013, during the climactic battle scene of KR at MGM Grand in Las Vegas, veteran performer Sarah Guyard-Guillot was ascending a vertical stage when she slipped out of her safety harness and plummeted 94 feet to the ground below. The 31-year-old mother of two died on the way to the hospital, becoming the first performer to die in a Cirque show's 29-year history. "I initially thought it was part of the choreography," said audience member Dan Mosqueda. "Then I heard screaming and the music stopped abruptly. People started crying. That's when we knew something terrible had happened." The company cancelled performances while implementing additional safety measures, including a secondary attachment system, but the tragedy would not be Cirque's last. 5 years later, on March 17, 2018, experienced aerialist Yann Arnaud was performing in Volta in Tampa, Florida. During a straps routine he had performed hundreds of times, Arnaud lost his grip during a complex maneuver and fell approximately 20 feet. Despite being rushed to the hospital, he died of his injuries. He was smiling right up to the moment of the fall, recalled fellow performer Juliana Costa. Yann had mentioned adding a new element to the routine that week. We'll never know if that contributed to what happened. Between these high-profile fatalities, Cirque du Soleil experienced numerous serious non-fatal incidents. In 2016, Lisa Skinner, a former Olympic gymnast, fell during a solo aerial hoops act in Australia, suffering spinal injuries.
Australian Olympian Lisa Skinner has spent the night in hospital after a big fall.
In 2019, a Russian swing artist fell during O at the Bellagio, though he survived.
For the Cirque du Soleil show, O fell during a performance at the Bellagio.
Each incident prompted intense soul-searching within the company. Cirque prided itself on pushing the boundaries of human performance while maintaining rigorous safety standards. The company's response typically involved extensive reviews, equipment modifications, and sometimes redesigning acts entirely, but never eliminating the fundamental risk inherent in aerial performances. These tragedies highlighted a difficult truth. Even with state-of-the-art equipment, extensive training, and meticulous safety protocols, the new circus remained as potentially deadly as the old. The contemporary emphasis on ever more spectacular and gravity-defying acts meant that when failures occurred, the consequences could be just as fatal as in traditional circus performances a century earlier. The Great Moscow Circus Wheel of Death. The aptly named Wheel of Death has long been considered one of the most dangerous circus acts in existence. The apparatus, consisting of two counter-rotating wheels connected by a metal frame, requires performers to run both inside and outside the wheels while the entire structure rotates at increasing speeds. On January 15, 2013, during the Great Moscow Circus's Australian tour in Broadmeadows, this fear-inducing apparatus lived up to its ominous name. Valery Kashkin and Yuri Formachev were experienced performers who had executed their death-defying routine thousands of times across 4 continents. The act involved running on the outside of the rotating wheels, skipping rope on the apparatus while blindfolded, and performing various stunts that left audiences breathless. That night, before a packed audience including hundreds of children, 55-year-old Kashkin was performing on the exterior of one wheel when he suddenly lost his footing. He plummeted 26 feet, landing with a sickening thud on the concrete floor. There was this collective gasp, remembered audience member Diane Whittle. My 8-year-old daughter was clutching my arm so tightly it left marks. Everyone realized at the same moment this wasn't part of the show. The impact shattered Kashkin's bones and caused severe internal bleeding. Medical personnel rushed to his side while the ringmaster asked the audience to leave. Many children were in tears, having witnessed what many adults found traumatizing. Remarkably, despite his catastrophic injuries, Kashkin survived. After multiple surgeries and months of rehabilitation, he even expressed a desire to return to performing, though circus management refused this request. The incident sparked renewed debate about the Wheel of Death, which had claimed numerous lives throughout circus history. Unlike many other dangerous acts that had evolved to incorporate safety harnesses or nets, the Wheel of Death typically remained free of such precautions because they would fundamentally change the nature and visual impact of the performance. The risk is part of the appeal, explained circus historian Timothy Clark. The audience is drawn to that edge between possible disaster and triumphant skill. But when disaster actually strikes, it forces everyone to question if the entertainment value justifies the human cost. In the aftermath, Australian workplace safety officials conducted an investigation and mandated changes, including crash mats placed strategically around the base of the apparatus. The Great Moscow Circus initially resisted these changes, arguing they diminished the spectacle, but eventually complied when faced with potential show cancellations. Circus safety reforms and modern regulations. The blood-stained sawdust of circus history has, over time, given way to considerably safer performance environments, though each safety improvement typically came at the cost of tragedy. The evolution of circus safety represents a century-long negotiation between risk, spectacle, and human welfare. Early circuses operated with virtually no safety oversight. Performers worked without contracts, insurance, or protective equipment. The Hartford Fire of 1944 marked a turning point, spawning the first comprehensive fire safety regulations for traveling shows. These included flame-retardant tent materials, mandatory fire extinguishers, unobstructed exits, and regular inspections. Before Hartford, safety was essentially voluntary, noted circus historian Dominique Jandot. After Hartford, it became legally mandated. The industry recognized that its very survival depended on preventing such disasters. Transportation safety evolved similarly after the Hagenbeck-Wallace train disaster. Modern circus transportation must conform to strict Department of Transportation regulations, with mandatory rest periods for drivers, regular vehicle inspections, and rigorous scheduling protocols. For performers, safety improvements came more gradually. The tragic deaths of aerialists like Harold Alzana in 1958, who fell 60 feet during a performance, eventually led to the development of specialized safety equipment, though many traditional circus families initially resisted such measures as compromising artistic integrity. By the 1980s, traditional nets gave way to more sophisticated fall arrest systems in many circuses. Modern performers often wear concealed harnesses connected to automated belay systems that can stop a fall almost instantly. Computer-controlled systems now manage complex aerial rigging that once depended entirely on human operators. Animal safety reforms followed a different trajectory, driven largely by changing public attitudes. After incidents like the Mary the Elephant execution and Roy Horn's mauling, pressure mounted to eliminate animal acts entirely. This culminated in Ringling Brothers' 2016 decision to retire all elephant acts before closing completely in 2017, marking the end of an era in American circus history. Today's circus safety landscape includes OSHA regulations, specialized insurance requirements, and industry-specific standards developed by organizations like the American Circus Educators Association. Modern circuses typically employ dedicated safety directors who oversee everything from equipment inspections to emergency response planning. Yet fundamental tensions remain. Many traditional circus artists still prefer performing without safety devices, believing risk is intrinsic to their art form. Smaller circuses, particularly in developing countries, often lack resources for sophisticated safety systems, and new acts constantly emerge that challenge existing safety protocols. The circus has always existed at the intersection of possible and impossible, explained former Cirque du Soleil safety director Jean Poulain. Our challenge is finding ways to make the seemingly impossible safe enough without making it ordinary.